Jakub's boots hit the cobbled stones with the dull thud of memory. The morning fog had wrapped itself around Prague like a forgotten shroud, blurring lampposts and chimneys until the city looked like something half-remembered from an old dream. Hradčany loomed ahead, its winding streets ancient and silent, the kind of silence that knew things. The air carried the scent of wet stone and dried rosemary, his grandmother's scent. Though he hadn't seen this place since childhood, the shadows seemed to recognize him. One window shutter creaked open and then shut again. A raven followed from a rooftop. Beneath the fog, the city whispered names he hadn't spoken aloud in years, names from the Lazar bloodline. He paused before the iron gate of his grandmother's house. Ivy had nearly swallowed it whole, and time had gnawed at the corners of the once grand stonework. The windows were dark, the roof sagging like tired shoulders. Yet the house leaned protectively against the ancient cathedral wall, as though both bore secrets they refused to speak. Jakub reached into his coat and drew out the brass key she had left him. It scraped against rusted iron before sliding in with a slow, reluctant twist. The door groaned open, spilling the scent of dust, candle wax, and something older, like dried flowers kept too long in a Bible. Inside, the house felt like a tomb. Thin curtains clung to cracked windows. Wooden beams creaked under a sighing wind. He moved through the room slowly, passing portraits whose eyes followed. In the study, he found a small stack of yellowed letters. One was addressed to him, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "Do not stir the blood of the Lazar line. What sleeps must sleep." He frowned. He didn't believe in curses or ancestral hauntings, but something in him, some sliver inherited from her old-world silence, hesitated. Still, he read every letter, studied every note, and searched the rooms like a man possessed not by ghosts, but by hunger, for truth, for story, for self. In the back room, behind a warped door, lay the library. No dust coated its shelves. It felt protected, preserved, as though time had no right to enter. Rows of books bound in leather and bark lined the walls. Some bore no titles, others were written in alphabets he didn't know. The air was colder here, heavy with unsaid things. At the far end hung a tapestry. A knight pierced by black arrows, his hands lifted toward a crumbling castle. Jakub approached and noticed the wall behind it. Unlike the others, it wasn't even. The stones bulged and pulsed faintly, as though something behind them was alive. A hollow thud made him jump. One of the books had fallen open. Inside, its pages were carved out, and nestled in the hollow was a rusted iron key. Small, ornate, and warm to the touch, though the room was freezing. Its smell was thick, like earth freshly dug. Next to it was a torn slip of parchment. The ink had smudged from age, but the last words remained, trembling and unfinished. The door must never. Jakub's breath grew shallow. His hand lifted the tapestry, revealing the uneven wall in full. A thin crack ran down the center, sharp and deliberate. His fingers searched and found a keyhole hidden in the stone itself. The iron key slid in and turned with a sound like bones grinding. The stones shifted, slowly, painfully. Cold wind poured. From the widening seam, air that had not tasted light in centuries. Without thinking, without deciding, Jakub stepped inside. The staircase spiraled downward into thick darkness. He held his breath and placed one foot after the other, each creaking step a beat in an old song. The deeper he went, the heavier the air became. The walls wept moisture. Whispers flitted just beyond hearing, spoken in voices both male and female, both old and never born. As he reached the final step, a tremor ran through the stones. He blinked, and the air shimmered like heat, except there was no warmth. In that moment, the world he knew vanished. The century turned inside out. And Jakub, last of the Lazar line, stood on the threshold of a past that had been waiting, breathing and watching. Jakub stepped into the chamber, and the world shifted. It was like walking through the folds of a dream too old to remember. The air was heavy with burning myrrh, clinging to his skin like ancient prayers. Candlelight trembled along the stone walls, illuminating grand tapestries that swayed though. There was no wind. A velvet curtain, embroidered with forgotten heraldry, parted slowly as though recognizing him. The floor beneath his feet did not creak. It sighed. Nothing had decayed. Time here had chosen stillness. The room waited, not in peace, but in restless memory. As Jakub's breath grew shallow, he felt the cold fingers of something watching, something remembering. He was not the first to stand here, and the chamber knew it. A gasp broke the silence. From the shadows emerged a girl no older than 20, dressed in the ornate fashion of a century-long buried. Her golden hair was tied with pearls, her eyes wide with disbelief and trembling hope. "Victor," she whispered, voice cracking like old glass. "You've returned." Jakub froze. I think you're mistaken." But her joy turned to confusion, then to fear. "No, it is you, Victor Lazar, my betrothed." Her voice trembled with the weight of emotion and doubt. Jakub, heart racing, nodded slowly. To deny her might undo him. To accept might entangle him in something far darker. Yet he could feel it. The pull of Victor's name, his face mirrored in Jakub's own reflection. He played along, trapped, in a tale already written, his own truth swallowed by a stranger's fate. His instinct screamed to flee, but the hidden door was gone. Where once had been stone cracked by time, now stood only seamless, ageless rock. No lock, no frame, just the smooth cold skin of the past refusing to let him go. Outside the small window, the city of Prague bustled, but not his Prague. Hoarse, carts rumbled over cobbles, and the bells from St. Vitus tolled in deep, solemn tones. Somewhere, musicians rehearsed for a masquerade. The air was filled with rose oil, not car fumes. Jakub's world was gone, folded beneath centuries. He had crossed into another time, and the road back was sealed. Days passed, or maybe hours. Time bent oddly here. Jakub wandered the manor, its endless candlelit halls whispering stories he hadn't asked for. The Lazar portraits stared at him with painted eyes, some stern, others sorrowful. Each room unveiled more of his lineage. The Lazar family, once noble and feared, had vanished without trace. Rumors of betrayal, blood oaths, and divine punishment clung to their name like mold on forgotten tombs. Jakub felt their judgment in every creak, every flicker of light, every shadow that stretched too long. One evening, in the alchemist's quarters, Jakub found a journal, leather-bound and weeping ink. Its pages spoke of Victor's secret, a deal forged in desperation with a faceless being called the Pale Man. For immortality, Victor had offered something precious, Lidka's soul. The sorcerer promised eternal life, power over death, and the fall of every enemy. But magic trades in cruelty, and the price was never fully paid. Jakub's hands shook as he turned the final page. The words seared into him like flame. The Lazar line will bear her silence forever. The chapel beneath the manor revealed the rest. Jakub followed candlelight through a hidden corridor and found it. Sealed stone, etched with claw marks, and the scent of lavender and blood. Lidka had discovered Victor's betrayal too late. Bound by ritual, she was entombed alive beneath the altar. Her screams had shaken the walls, but no one came. Before the final stone closed in, she had uttered a curse. Not in rage, but in sorrow. A curse to bind the bloodline until her justice was seen, her voice heard. "Until the mask is lifted," she had whispered, "no Lazar shall rest." Jakub felt it now. The weight in his veins, the aching in his chest. He saw Lidka's ghost in mirrors, her pale eyes watching with sorrow. Candle flames spoke in her voice. Old scars opened on his body. Cuts, bruises, wounds from another man's. Crimes. Her grief had become a vine, wrapping around his heart. He could not move without feeling her presence. He no longer bled for himself, but for a story buried in stone. He wandered the streets beyond the manor, seeking help, reason, escape. But Prague was not Prague anymore. The streets twisted into alleys that had never existed. People nodded at him, calling him Victor with smiles or curses. He tried to protest, but the world did not listen. Dreams visited him each night, memories of a life he never lived. Dancing with Lidka under the chandeliers, signing pacts in blood, kissing her forehead before leaving her to die. He began to forget his own name. Who was Jakub, but a shadow inside Victor's echo? The night of the masquerade approached, and with it, dread. It was the same festival, the same hour, where Victor had planned to trade Lidka's soul. Jakub watched the townspeople prepare, their masks painted with beasts and saints, their voices thick with excitement. The bells tolled again, and his heartbeat matched them. This night was cursed. It would come again. History did not forget. It repeated. The Lazar line would walk its shame once more, unless something changed. Jakub stood now in the great hall, where Lidka's spirit wept in silence and Victor's echo poisoned the air. She appeared before him, not a ghost but a sorrow made flesh. Her eyes did not accuse, but asked. Would he follow Victor's path or choose another? The curse demanded a price. But what if redemption could be earned, not inherited? Jakub stepped forward, not as Victor, not as a Lazar, but as himself. He knelt before her. I am sorry for what he did, for what I carry, but I am not him. I choose justice. Her tears vanished. The air grew still, and somewhere deep below, a stone began to crack. The music floated like mist through the painted halls, soft violins weaving a dream that hid the rotting truth beneath. Masked nobles spun in polished shoes across marble floors, laughing as though nothing but joy filled the air. Candlelight flickered along the gilded walls, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. The ceiling bore faded angels and weeping, saints watching in silence as the sins of old came dressed in silk and wine. Jakub stood at the edge of it all, face hidden behind a silver mask shaped like a mourning raven. He did not dance. His eyes moved from face to face, searching. Not for someone, but for certainty. Was he truly Jakub of Prague, or was he Victor, Lazar, reborn? Each step felt like walking through a memory he never lived. In the garden, beyond the revelry, roses drooped as if mourning their own thorns. Statues of forgotten heroes stared blindly at the night sky, their marble eyes clouded with moss. There, beneath a cursed moon, Lidka waited. She did not flinch when Jakub approached. Her eyes met his, and though the mask hid most of his face, she knew. "You're not him," she whispered. Her voice didn't tremble, though her heart did. "You wear his face, but not his soul." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and sad. He opened his mouth, but words failed. She did not weep nor rage. Instead, she looked at him as if she mourned two deaths, Victor's and the boy who now bore his name. Smoke slithered through the hedges like a living thing, curling around their ankles before rising into the sky. The violin music faltered. A presence colder than winter stepped into the clearing. The pale man. Cloaked in darkness, faceless as a nightmare, he stood without weight or warmth. The very air recoiled from him. "Lazar," he intoned, voice thin as paper yet echoing like a cathedral bell. "The debt remains." He lifted one, bony hand toward Jakub, and time seemed to shudder. The dead deal, made centuries ago, demanded its due. No mask could hide that truth. Jakub fell to his knees, clutching his head as visions raged behind his eyes. Screams rang out, Lidka's voice begging, the sound of stone sealing her fate. Victor's laughter in a chamber filled with mirrors. The moment of the pact, when soul and sin were traded in a flicker of candlelight. Blood spilled across the altar of ambition. None of it was Jakub's doing, and yet it burned in his veins like his own. The pain, the guilt, the horror. Victor's memories, now his burden. Lidka stepped closer, her form beginning to shimmer. No longer flesh, but not fully spirit. A being caught between justice and release. Her eyes, once bright with love, now held centuries of sorrow. "The curse," she said softly, "ends not with vengeance. It ends with choice. Real choice. Not one born of fear, but of truth." Her voice broke like wind against glass. "Only then can I be free." The pale man advanced, his fingers reaching for Lidka as if to claim what had been promised. But Jakub rose. "Take me," he said, his voice steady. "I offer myself." The pale man paused. "Freely." Jakub nodded. "Freely." Not out of guilt, not to escape, but because it was right. He stepped between the darkness and Lidka, and for the first time the pact wavered. He was no knight, no prince, just a man choosing to protect rather than possess. A choice Victor never made. Lidka wept, but they were not tears of pain. They fell slow and bright, each drop cutting the air like silver rain. She raised her hand, not to strike, but to bless. "Then I forgive you," she whispered, not just to Jakub, but to the soul of Victor, and the bloodline bound by his sin. The pale man screamed, a howl not of anger, but of disbelief. The curse, built on fear and betrayal, shattered under the weight of forgiveness. The earth groaned. Cracks spread through the manor's stones. Light burst from every shadow, gold and warm. From the halls, spirits rose. Former victims of the Lazar line, released at last. The pale man's cloak unraveled like smoke in the wind. His scream became wind, then nothing. The mask fell from Jakub's face as the past unraveled. The tale did not end in wrath or ruin, but in redemption, lit by a single, selfless choice. Jakub's eyes opened to a dim ceiling lined with ancient beams. The air was still, thick with dust and the scent of candle wax long burned out. He lay, flat on the cold library floor, fingers curled over nothing but wood and faded rugs. There was no whisper behind the bookshelf now, no creak of hinges, no hint of the hidden door. The wall stood whole again, undisturbed, as if time had never cracked its stones. But inside Jakub, something had broken open and would never quite seal again. His breath came slow and shaky, not from fear, but from knowing. He had crossed something sacred, something terrible, and returned with more than just memory. His soul bore marks no eyes could see. As the soft gold of dawn bled through the window panes, Jakub sat still, wrapped in a silence deeper than the books around him. And then, faintly, as if carried on wind and prayer, he heard her voice again. Some debts, his grandmother once whispered, must be paid with the heart, not the hand. Back then, he hadn't understood. He thought it meant charity, kindness, some simple duty of family. But now, her words glowed in the marrow of him. They weren't just advice, they were a truth written in the bones of his bloodline. Her voice was gone, but the warmth of her wisdom lingered like incense in a chapel, filling him, steadying him. He stood slowly, joints stiff, and noticed something that hadn't been there before. On the desk, between a candlestick and an old ledger, lay a piece of parchment. The ink was fresh, smudged slightly in one corner where it had not yet dried. The handwriting was elegant, careful, Lidka's hand. But this was no ghost's farewell. It was a note from a soul that had found peace. "Live freely," it read. "You carry no more chains." Her words bled through the page and into his chest. He touched the letter as though it might dissolve under his fingers, tears rising uninvited. Forgiveness had been offered, not earned by force or fear, but accepted through sacrifice. And the ink, still damp, glistened like a tear that never had to fall. Jakub stepped outside into the morning light. The cobblestones of Prague stretched ahead, just as they always had, uneven and worn by centuries. Tram bells clanged softly in the distance, and a baker's chimney puffed smoke above a yellow rooftop. But something was different. The air felt lighter, crisper. The shadows that used to slink behind statues and under doorways had loosened their grip. There was still sorrow in the world. There always would be, but the particular heaviness that once pressed against the city had lifted. The curse had loosened its claws from the Lazar name. Prague exhaled, and so did Jakub. He never truly returned to the man he was. That Jakub, the restless student, the disbeliever in old things, had been laid to rest behind that hidden wall. In his place stood a man who remembered, a man who carried stories like relics. Carefully, reverently, he dedicated his life to what had been lost, to names erased by time, to truths buried beneath guilt, to voices silenced by fear. He taught in libraries, guided visitors through forgotten quarters of the city, told tales that made grown men weep and children listen wide-eyed. And when he spoke the Lazar name, it was not with shame, but pride. Not for the sins it had carried, but for the redemption it had finally found. Where once there was only ruin, there now stood a legacy, built not on power, but on truth.